The champagne glass slipped from my manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the five-star hotel ballroom. 300 guests turned toward the sound, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on the figure standing silently in the doorway, my mother, wearing a simple blue dress I had never seen before, clutching a small wrapped gift with hands that still bore the calluses of 20 years of janitorial work. "Sarah," my new husband whispered beside me, "isn't that your—" "She wasn't supposed to be here," I breathed, my carefully applied makeup suddenly feeling like a mask that was suffocating me. The woman who had raised me, sacrificed everything for me, and whom I had deliberately excluded from the most important day of my life, stood there with the quiet dignity that had always made me feel simultaneously proud and ashamed. In that moment, as the wedding music continued to play and my perfect day began to unravel, I realized that some sins cannot be hidden behind designer gowns and five-star venues. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand how we arrived at this moment, you need to know about the years of shame that brought us here, and the devastating truth that would soon emerge from my mother's lips, a truth that would change everything I thought I knew about love, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be worthy. I was 26 when I decided my mother was an embarrassment I could no longer afford. The realization struck me like a physical blow on a Tuesday morning in downtown Manhattan, where I worked as a senior marketing coordinator for a prestigious firm. I was rushing to catch the elevator when I heard a familiar voice call my name. "Sarah, Sarah, honey." I turned, and there she was, me mother, Maria Santos, wearing her faded blue janitor's uniform, her graying hair pulled back in the same practical ponytail she had worn since I was a child. She was mopping the lobby floor of my building, the building where I worked alongside CEOs and executives, where image meant everything and pedigree opened doors. My colleagues were standing nearby, including James Morrison, the partner I had been desperately trying to impress for months. They watched as this woman in a cleaning uniform approached me with unconcealed affection, her weathered face lighting up with the kind of genuine joy that money could never buy. "I didn't know you worked in this building, mi amor," she said, reaching out to touch my arm with a wet glove. "I just started this job last week. Isn't this wonderful? Now I can see you during—" "I'm sorry," I interrupted, stepping back as if she had struck me. "I think you have me confused with someone else." The words left my mouth before I could stop them, cold and sharp as winter air. My mother's face crumpled, the light in her eyes dimming like a candle being snuffed out. She stood there for a moment, mop in hand, staring at me with the kind of hurt that cuts through bone and lodges itself in your soul. "Sarah," she whispered, so quietly that only I could hear. "It's me, it's Mama." But I had already turned away, my heels clicking against the marble floor as I walked toward my colleagues, leaving her standing there in a puddle of dirty water and broken dreams. James Morrison nodded approvingly as I approached, completely unaware that I had just committed the most unforgivable act of my life. "Good morning, Sarah," he said smoothly. "Ready for the Peterson presentation?" "Absolutely," I replied, my voice steady despite the fact that my heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces. "I've been preparing for weeks." That evening, I received a text message from my mother that I deleted without reading. Then another, and another. Soon, I changed my phone number altogether, telling myself that successful people sometimes had to make difficult choices, that my career aspirations were too important to be derailed by sentimentality. The promotion came 3 months later. Senior Director of Marketing, corner office, 6-figure salary. I celebrated with my new circle of friends at an upscale restaurant in Soho, ordering expensive wine and pretending that the hollow feeling in my chest was satisfaction rather than grief. To Sarah Santos Mitchell, James Morrison raised his glass. "The most dedicated and focused professional I've had the pleasure of working with." I smiled and accepted the toast, even though hearing my hyphenated last name, which I had adopted to sound more sophisticated, felt like swallowing glass. My mother's maiden name, Santos, the name she had carried with pride through 20 years of night shifts and double shifts and weekend shifts, was now just an accessory to make me sound more cosmopolitan. The months that followed were a blur of success and emptiness. I moved to a luxury apartment on the Upper East Side, joined an exclusive gym, and began dating Michael Harrison, a Harvard-educated investment banker whose family owned vacation homes in the Hamptons. Everything was proceeding according to the plan I had crafted for my new life, the life where Maria Santos, the janitor, did not exist. But late at night, when the champagne had worn off and the designer clothes hung lifeless in my walk-in closet, I would sometimes find myself staring at the ceiling and remembering the way my mother used to sing lullabies in Spanish while braiding my hair for school. I would remember the smell of her homemade empanadas filling our tiny apartment, the way she would work double shifts to buy me the school supplies I needed, the fierce pride in her eyes when I graduated summa cum laude from college. I would remember, and then I would force myself to forget. Because forgetting was easier than facing the magnitude of what I had done. The discovery came 18 months later, during the week before my engagement party. Michael and I were cleaning out my childhood bedroom in preparation for selling my mother's old apartmenta property that had apparently been left to me in her will, though I had never bothered to investigate the details of her financial situation. I was sorting through dusty boxes when my fingers found something unexpected. A shoebox wrapped in faded ribbon, hidden beneath a stack of my old school reports that my mother had carefully preserved. The box was heavier than I expected, and when I opened it, I discovered the reason why. 27 letters, each one addressed to me in my mother's careful handwriting, each one dated and sealed but never sent. The earliest was from my first semester of college, the most recent from just 3 months ago. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, and began to read. My dearest Sarah, today you started college, and I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. I know you're embarrassed by the way I cry at your graduation ceremony, but you cannot understand what it means to see my daughter, me brilliant, beautiful daughter walking across that stage to receive her degree. I wanted to call you tonight to ask about your classes, but I know you are busy making new friends and starting your new life. I decided to write this letter instead, even though I will probably never send it. Sometimes it is easier to say things on paper than out loud. You asked me not to visit you at school, and I understand. I know that having a mother who cleans buildings for a living is not something you want your new friends to know about. It hurts my heart, mi amor, but I understand. When you are my age, you will know that a mother's love means wanting what is best for her child, even when it causes her pain. I work extra shifts now, so I can send you money for books and food without you having to ask. I know you think you are being independent, but independence is easier when someone loves you enough to make sure you never go hungry. I hope someday you will understand that accepting help from people who love you is not weakness, it is just another form of love. Your proud mama, Maria. My hands shook as I set the first letter aside and reached for the second, then the third. With each page, the full scope of my mother's sacrifice revealed itself like a photograph developing in a dark room. She had worked 3 jobs to pay for my college education, while telling me she could only afford to help with books. She had gone without new clothes for years so I could have the laptop I needed for my courses. She had moved to a smaller apartment in a worse neighborhood so she could afford to send me spending money that I had assumed came from financial aid. But more devastating than the financial sacrifices were the emotional confessions scattered throughout the letters. In her careful English improved through night classes she had taken, while working full-time, my mother had poured out her heart, her fears, her hopes, and her unwavering love for the daughter who had grown too sophisticated to acknowledge her. Sara mi corazón. I saw you on the news today. Channel 7 did a story about young professionals making a difference in their communities, and there you were, standing in front of your office building, talking about your marketing campaign for the children's hospital. You looked so beautiful and confident, like you owned the whole world. I wanted to call all my friends and tell them to watch, but then I remembered that you told me not to mention you to people we know. I recorded it on my old VCR instead and watched it 5 times before going to work. I know every word you said by heart now. When the reporter asked about your family, you said you were self-made, and that you came from humble beginnings but preferred to focus on the future rather than the past. I suppose that is true, but it made me cry anyway. I am proud that you are strong enough to make your own way in the world, but I wish you knew that some parts of the past are worth remembering. I love you always. Mama. The later letters grew shorter, more resigned, but no less loving. They chronicled my promotion, my new apartment, my engagement announcement that she had apparently read about in the society pages of the newspaper. They spoke of her pride, her worry, her persistent hope that someday I would remember where I came from and who had helped me get there. The final letter was dated just 3 months before my wedding. My precious daughter, I know you are planning your wedding now, and I know I will not be invited. I have known this for a long time, ever since the day you pretended not to know me in the lobby of your building. That day broke something in my heart that has never healed properly. Asterisk. But I want you to know that I forgive you, and I understand. Sometimes children have to break away from their parents to become who they are meant to be. I just hope that someday, when you have children of your own, you will understand what it costs a mother to let go. Asterisk. I have been saving money to buy you a wedding gift. It is not much, but it comes from a heart full of love for the little girl who used to fall asleep in my arms while I read her stories about princesses and happy endings. I hope your marriage brings you all the happiness you deserve. Asterisk. Whether you know it or not, you will always be my greatest achievement, my proudest moment, my most precious gift. No matter how far you go or how successful you become, you will always be my baby girl. Asterisk. I love you forever and always. Asterisk. Your mother. Asterisk. Maria Santos. I sat in that dusty bedroom for hours, surrounded by the evidence of a love so pure and selfless that it made my own achievements feel hollow and meaningless. My mother had worked 3 jobs, moved to progressively smaller apartments, and endured the public humiliation of having her own daughter deny her existence, all while maintaining a hope that someday I would come home. The engagement ring on my finger suddenly felt like a shackle, and the wedding dress hanging in my closet seemed like a costume for a play I no longer wanted to perform in. But by then, the invitations had been sent, the deposits had been paid, and the machinery of my perfect life was too far in motion to stop. Michael found me there at midnight, still clutching the letters, my makeup long since washed away by tears I had not realized I was crying. "What's wrong?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was more concerned about the disruption to our schedule than the source of my distress. "Nothing," I said, carefully placing the letters back in their box. "Just old stuff. We should go." But as we drove back to Manhattan in his BMW, the weight of those 27 letters pressed against my chest like a stone, and I knew that I had already lost something infinitely more valuable than anything I had gained. 2 months before the wedding, my mother called me. I had changed my phone number twice since our encounter at my office building, but somehow she had found the new one. The phone rang at 8 in the evening as Michael and I were reviewing the final guest list for our reception, and I almost did not answer when I saw the unfamiliar number on the display. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Sarah? My amor, it's Mama." Her voice was older than I remembered, softer around the edges, but unmistakably hers. Hearing it after so many months of silence was like being punched in the stomach and embraced at the same time. "How did you get this number?" I asked, my tone colder than I intended. "Your cousin Elena," she said quietly. "I asked her to help me find you. Sarah, I need to talk to you about." "I'm busy," I interrupted, though I was not. Michael was in the kitchen making coffee, and I was doing nothing more important than arranging place cards for people who would never remember where they sat. "Please, mi amor, just for a few minutes. I won't take much of your time." There was something in her voice that I had never heard before, a fragility that made her sound breakable. Despite my best efforts to remain detached, I found myself agreeing to meet her at a small coffee shop in Queens, neutral territory where neither of us belonged completely. She was waiting for me when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had probably gone cold an hour ago. She had dressed carefully for our Matinja navy blue dress that I remembered from my high school graduation, low heels that made her seem smaller than she was, her hair styled in a way that looked like she had spent considerable time in front of a mirror. "You look beautiful," she said when I approached the table, and her eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "So sophisticated, like a movie star." I sat down across from her, my designer purse creating a barrier between us on the scarred formica table. "What did you want to talk about?" For a moment, she just studied my face, as if she were trying to memorize it. Then she reached into her own purse, and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I wanted to give you this," she said, sliding it across the table. "For your wedding." I stared at the box without touching it. "How do you know about my wedding?" "I read about it in the newspaper," she said quietly. "The announcement in the Sunday Times. You looked so happy in the picture." "The announcement? Of course." Michael's family had insisted on placing a full-page spread in the society section, complete with our engagement photos and a detailed description of our planned reception. I had forgotten that such things were public, that anyone with $1.50 could buy a copy and read about my new life. I wanted to ask you, she continued, her voice growing smaller with each word, what I should wear to the wedding. I know it is fancy, and I want to make sure I dress properly. I have been saving money for a new dress, something that won't embarrass you. The words hit me like ice water. She thought she was invited. After everything that had happened, after months of silence and avoidance, she somehow believed that she would be welcome at my wedding. Mom, I said, the word feeling foreign in my mouth after so long. You're not invited. She blinked slowly, as if she had not heard me correctly. What? You're not invited to the wedding. It's a small ceremony. Very exclusive. Just close friends and family. But I am family, she whispered. I am your mother. It's complicated, I said, hating myself even as the words left my mouth. Michael's family has certain expectations. The guest list is very carefully curated. It's nothing personal. That was a lie, and we both knew it. Michael's family had never met my mother, had never even heard her name mentioned in their presence. The guest list included distant cousins of his that he barely knew, college acquaintances who had become useful business contacts, and society friends whose primary qualification for attendance was their ability to enhance our image as a rising power couple. My mother sat in silence for a long moment, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her teacup. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Sarah, do you really not want me at your wedding? I should have said yes. I should have told her that I had outgrown the need for her presence in my life, that my future had no room for janitors in faded dresses who sang lullabies in Spanish and cried at graduation ceremonies. I should have been honest about my shame, and my ambition, and my complete willingness to sacrifice her happiness for my own social advancement. Instead, I said something worse. It's not about what I want, it's about what makes sense. You wouldn't fit in with the other guests. You wouldn't be comfortable, and honestly, your presence would be distracting. This day is too important to risk any complications. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the coffee machine hissing in the background and the murmur of other conversations around us. My mother stared at me for what felt like an eternity, and I watched as understanding dawned in her eyes, not just that she was not invited, but that her own daughter was ashamed of her. I see, she said finally, her voice hollow. I understand. She stood up slowly, leaving the gift box on the table between us. I hope you have a beautiful wedding, mi amor. I hope it is everything you dreamed it would be. Mom, wait. I started, but she was already walking away, her small figure disappearing into the crowd of people on the street outside. I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, staring at the gift box she had left behind. When I finally opened it, I found a simple silver locket that I recognized from my childhood, my grandmother's locket, which my mother had worn every day since I was born. Inside was a tiny photograph of the two of us from my college graduation, both of us smiling with the kind of happiness that seemed impossible now. The locket felt heavy in my palm, weighted with the gravity of what I had just done. But I closed the box, put it in my purse, and drove home to my fiancé and my perfect life, telling myself that some sacrifices were necessary for success. I never imagined that she would find another way to attend my wedding. I never imagined that her presence would be the thing that finally forced me to confront the person I had become. The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect October day that wedding planners pray for and photographers dream about. I woke up in the bridal suite of the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by my bridesmaids and a team of stylists who had arrived before sunrise to transform me into the vision of perfection that Michael and I had spent months planning. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the girl who had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, whose mother had worked 3 jobs to pay for her school clothes. My hair had been twisted into an elaborate updo that required 47 bobby pins and 3 different styling products. My makeup had been applied by an artist who charged more for a single session than my mother used to make in a month. The dress, a custom creation by a designer whose name I dropped casually in conversation, fit me like liquid silk and cost more than most people's cars. You look absolutely radiant, gushed Rebecca, my maid of honor and Michael's sister, as she adjusted my veil for the 100th time. This is going to be the wedding of the year. I smiled and nodded, accepting the compliments and congratulations that flowed around me like water. But beneath the layers of silk and satin and carefully applied confidence, something felt hollow. As I stared at my reflection, I realized that I looked like exactly what I had always wanted to be: successful, sophisticated, untouchable. So why did I feel like I was wearing a costume? The ceremony itself was everything we had planned. 300 guests filled the ballroom of the plaza, a sea of designer gowns and custom suits that represented the social elite of Manhattan. Michael looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, and when he took my hand at the altar, I could see the approval in his eyes. I was his perfect bride, the final accessory in a life carefully curated for success. Do you, Sarah Elizabeth Santos, Mitchell, take Michael Jonathan Harrison to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, I said, my voice clear and strong, carrying across the ballroom to our assembled guests. But even as I spoke the words that would bind my future to his, I found myself scanning the crowd for a face that I knew would not be there. Somewhere in the back of my mind, despite everything that had happened, I had harbored a small, secret hope that my mother would appear. That she would somehow find a way to witness this moment, to see me achieve the dream that her sacrifices had made possible. The reception began at 6 o'clock with cocktails and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per plate than my mother's monthly rent. Michael and I moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting congratulations and posing for photographs that would later appear in society magazines. His parents glowed with pride as they introduced us to important business contacts, and I played my part perfectly: the charming new wife, who would be an asset to her husband's career and social standing. We were just sitting down for dinner when it happened. The ballroom doors, which had been closed for the past hour, suddenly opened with a sound that somehow carried over the chamber music and animated conversation of 300 guests. A collective hush fell over the room as every head turned toward the entrance, where a figure stood silhouetted against the bright lights of the hotel corridor. My mother walked into my wedding reception wearing a simple navy blue dress that I had never seen before, her graying hair pulled back in a modest bun, her worn black shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. She carried a small wrapped package in her hands, and her eyes searched the room until they found mine across the sea of shocked faces. The silence was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as 300 of Manhattan's social elite stared at this woman who clearly did not belong in their carefully curated world. Michael's grip on my hand tightened, and I could see the confusion and alarm in his eyes. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, "who is that woman?" But I could not answer. I could not speak at all. I simply sat there, frozen in my perfect dress at my perfect wedding, watching as my mother stood quietly at the back of the room, making no move to approach, asking for nothing except the right to witness her daughter's happiness from a distance. For a moment, I thought she would simply leave. She had seen me in my wedding dress, had confirmed that I was safe and happy and surrounded by people who valued me. She had kept her promise to stay away while still finding a way to be present for the most important day of my life. It was exactly the kind of selfless compromise that my mother had been making for years. But then Michael did something that changed everything. He stood up slowly, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment, and began walking toward my mother with the purposeful stride of a man accustomed to removing obstacles from his path. The entire ballroom watched as he approached this small woman in her simple dress. And I knew with absolute certainty that he was going to humiliate her in front of everyone, that he was going to treat her like an intruder at an exclusive party, rather than the mother of the bride. "Excuse me," I heard him say, his voice carrying across the silent room. "But this is a private event. I'm going to have to ask you to." "Number." The word escaped my lips before I realized I was speaking. I stood up so quickly that my chair fell backward, the sound echoing through the ballroom like a gunshot. Every eye in the room was now focused on me as I walked toward my mother with steps that felt like they were carrying me across years of regret and shame rather than just the width of a dance floor. "Michael, stop," I said, my voice stronger now. "This is my mother." The gasps that rippled through the crowd were audible, and I could see the shock on the faces of people who had known me for years without ever hearing me mention my family. Michael's face went white, then red, then white again as he processed what I had just said. But my mother just smiled, the same gentle, forgiving smile that had greeted me every day when I came home from school, the smile that had never wavered even when I pretended not to know her. the smile that I had thrown away in my desperate pursuit of a life that suddenly felt meaningless. "Hello, mi amor," she said quietly. "You look beautiful." And for the first time in years, I felt like I truly was. Michael recovered from his shock quickly, his business training kicking in as he attempted to salvage what he clearly saw as a public relations disaster. He smiled tightly and extended his hand to my mother, his voice taking on the polished tone he used with difficult clients. "Mrs. Santos," he said, though I had never told him her name. What a surprise. "I'm Michael Harrison, Sarah's husband. Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," my mother said simply, her voice carrying a quiet authority that stopped him mid-sentence. "I have something to say, and I think everyone should hear it." She looked around the ballroom at the sea of faces: investment bankers and socialites, politicians and business owners, people whose net worth exceeded the annual budgets of small countries. They stared back at her with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, clearly unsure how to process the presence of this obviously working-class woman at their exclusive gathering. "My daughter told me I was not invited to her wedding," my mother continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She said I would not fit in with the other guests. She said my presence would be— how did you put it, mi amor? Distracting." The silence in the room was absolute. I could see Michael's father leaning forward in his chair, his face tight with disapproval, while his mother fanned herself dramatically as if she might faint from the scandal of it all. My bridesmaids looked horrified, and several of my colleagues from work had their phones out, undoubtedly preparing to document whatever was about to unfold. "Sarah is probably right," my mother said, setting her small gift on the nearest table. "I am just a janitor. I clean office buildings and public restrooms, and school hallways. My hands are rough from scrubbing floors, and my back aches from bending over mop buckets. I am not educated like you, and I do not have money like you, and I certainly do not know which fork to use for the salad course." A few people in the crowd actually laughed at this, as if she were making a joke for their entertainment. But my mother was not finished. "But I think you should know something about the bride," she continued, her eyes finding mine across the room. "You should know about the little girl who almost died when she was 8 years old." My blood turned to ice water. She was going to tell them. She was going to expose the secret that I had buried so deeply that I had almost convinced myself it never happened. "The doctors said it was acute lymphoblastic leukemia," my mother said, her voice steady despite the tears that had begun rolling down her cheeks. "They said she needed immediate treatment, and that even with the best care, her chances were not good. The treatment would cost more money than I made in 5 years, even working 3 jobs. The ballroom was so quiet that I could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents overhead. Michael had gone completely still beside me, his face pale as he processed what my mother was revealing. "So I sold our house," she continued. "I sold our car. I sold my mother's wedding ring and my father's watch, and every piece of jewelry I owned. I took out loans that I am still paying back 15 years later. I worked as a janitor during the day, cleaned restaurants at night, and did laundry for neighbors on the weekends. I slept 3 hours a night for 2 years while my daughter fought for her life. My knees were shaking so badly that I had to grip the back of a chair to remain standing. The little girl with leukemia was supposed to be dead and buried, a painful chapter from my past that had no place in my carefully constructed future. I had never told Michael about the cancer, had never mentioned the months of chemotherapy and radiation, had never explained why I had no baby pictures or childhood mementos because they had all been lost when we were evicted from our house to pay for my medical bills. For 2 years, my mother said, her voice breaking slightly, I prayed every night that God would let me keep my daughter. I promised him that if Sarah lived, I would never ask for anything else in my entire life. I would be grateful every single day, just to see her grow up, to watch her succeed, to witness her happiness. She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her worn purse. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, filled with a fierce pride that made everyone in the room lean forward to hear her better. My daughter did not just survive, she said. She excelled. She graduated summa cum laude from college. She built a successful career. She found love with a good man. She became everything I dreamed she could be and more. And every single day for the past 18 years, I have thanked God for the miracle of her life. The crowd was hanging on her every word now, and I could see that many of them were crying. These people who had dismissed her as an intruder were now completely captivated by her story, by the raw emotion in her voice, by the unconditional love that radiated from every word she spoke. "My daughter is ashamed of me," my mother continued, looking directly at me with eyes full of pain and forgiveness. "She thinks that having a mother who cleans toilets for a living makes her less worthy of respect. She believes that my presence in her life diminishes her somehow. And maybe she is right. Maybe I am an embarrassment." "No," I whispered, but the word was lost in the vast silence of the ballroom. "But I want all of you to know," my mother said, raising her voice slightly, "that this woman, this brilliant, beautiful, successful woman is the greatest achievement of my life. Every sacrifice I made was worth it to see her standing here today. Every hard day, every sleepless night, every moment of pain and worry and fear was worth it to watch her become the person she was meant to be." She picked up her gift from the table and held it out toward me, though the distance between us was too great for me to reach it. "I brought you a wedding present, mi amor," she said. "It is not much, just something old that I thought you might want to have with you on your special day. But I understand now that you have everything you need without it. You have built a beautiful life, and I am proud of you." She set the gift back down and began walking toward the door, her small figure moving through the crowd of stunned guests who parted silently to let her pass. "I love you, Sarah," she called back without turning around. "I will always love you no matter what. And I hope that someday, when you have children of your own, you will understand that a mother's love is not something to be ashamed of. It is the greatest gift you will ever receive." The ballroom doors closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo through the silence like thunder. 300 people sat in absolute stillness, processing what they had just witnessed, while I stood there in my designer wedding dress feeling like I was drowning in shame and regret. It was Michael who broke the silence, his voice tight with anger and humiliation. "How could you not tell me about any of this?" he hissed, grabbing my arm roughly enough to leave marks. "How could you let me be blindsided like this in front of everyone?" But I was not listening to him anymore. I was staring at the ballroom doors through which my mother had disappeared, realizing that I had just lost the most important person in my life for the second time, and this time, it might be forever. I ran. Without a word to Michael, without a glance at the 300 guests who were still sitting in stunned silence, without any consideration for the designer dress that was already tearing as I gathered it in my fists, I ran through the ballroom doors and into the hotel corridor beyond. My heels slipped on the marble floor, so I kicked them off and continued barefoot, my veil streaming behind me like a banner of surrender. The elevator was too slow, so I threw open the door to the stairwell and began taking the steps two at a time, my dress trailing behind me like a broken dream. By the time I reached the lobby, my carefully styled hair was falling down around my shoulders and my makeup was streaked with tears I did not remember crying. The doorman stared at me in shock as I burst through the revolving doors and onto the street, where I found my mother standing at the bus stop, clutching her small purse and staring straight ahead with the dignity of someone who had said everything she needed to say. "Mama," I called out, my voice breaking on the word I had not used in years. "Mama, please wait." She turned slowly, and the expression on her face nearly brought me to my knees. There was no anger there, no resentment, no accusation, just a deep sadness that seemed to have settled into her bones. "Sarah," she said quietly, "you should go back to your wedding, your guests are waiting." "I don't care about the guests," I said, reaching for her hands with my own trembling fingers. "I care about you. I'm so sorry, Mama, I'm so sorry for everything." For a moment, she just looked at me, her daughter in a torn wedding dress, standing barefoot on a New York sidewalk, finally calling her by the name she had been waiting to hear for years. Then her face crumpled and she pulled me into her arms with the fierce intensity of someone who had been holding back an ocean of love. "Oh, mi amor," she whispered against my hair. "My precious baby girl, I have missed you so much." We stood there on the busy street corner, holding each other while taxis honked around us and pedestrians stared at the spectacle we were making. I could smell her familiar perfume, same drugstore brand she had worn since I was a child, and feel the calluses on her hands as she stroked my hair. For the first time in years I felt like I was home. "I read your letters," I said through my tears. "All 27 of them. I found them when I was cleaning out the apartment, and I read every single one. You were not supposed to find those, she said, pulling back to look at my face. Those were just for me, to help me feel closer to you when you were so far away. Why didn't you send them? Why didn't you ever tell me how you felt? Because you needed to become who you were meant to be, she said simply. And I knew that having me around would only make it harder for you. I could see how much you wanted to fit in with your new friends, how important it was for you to be successful. I did not want to hold you back. The magnitude of her sacrifice hit me like a physical blow. She had endured years of silence, loneliness, and rejection because she believed it would make my life easier. She had worked extra shifts to send me money I never thanked her for, had celebrated my achievements from a distance because she thought her presence would diminish them, had loved me unconditionally, even when I treated her like a stranger. You never held me back, I said, gripping her hands tighter. You made everything possible. Every success I've had, every door that opened for me, every good thing in my life, it all started with you. With your love and your sacrifice and your belief in me when I didn't believe in myself. I know you were sick when you were little, she said, her voice gentle. I know the cancer was scary, and the treatment was hard, and that you do not like to remember that time. But Sarah, mi amor, you survived because you are strong. You succeeded because you are brilliant. I just helped a little bit along the way. You didn't just help a little bit, I said, my voice fierce with emotion. You saved my life. Not just from the cancer, from everything. You taught me what love looks like, what sacrifice means, what it costs to put someone else's happiness before your own. You are the strongest person I know, and I have spent years being ashamed of the one thing I should be most proud of. The bus arrived then, its brakes hissing as it stopped at the curb. My mother looked at it, then back at me, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to believe that this moment was real, that her daughter had finally come home, but she had been hurt too many times to trust it completely. I should go, she said quietly. Your husband will be worried, and you have guests waiting. This is your special day, and I do not want to ruin it any more than I already have. You didn't ruin anything, I said desperately. You made it real. For the first time in years, you made me feel like myself again. But she was already pulling away from me, already stepping toward the bus doors. Take care of yourself, mi amor. Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted. Mama, please. I love you, she said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. I will always love you, nothing will ever change that. The bus doors closed between us, with a finality that felt like death. I pressed my hands against the glass, and watched as my mother found a seat, her small figure disappearing into the crowd of passengers. She did not look back at me as the bus pulled away from the curb and merged into traffic, carrying her away from me once again. I stood there on the sidewalk for a long time, still in my torn wedding dress, watching the bus until it disappeared completely. People walked around me, some stopping to stare at the bride who had apparently lost her mind, but I did not care. All I could think about was the look in my mother's eyes as the doors closed, the look of someone who had given everything and asked for nothing in return. When I finally returned to the hotel, Michael was waiting for me in the lobby, his face dark with anger and embarrassment. The wedding reception was still going on upstairs, but the energy had clearly shifted from celebration to damage control. Where the hell have you been? He demanded, grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise. Do you have any idea what you've done? My father's business partners are up there, Sarah. Important people. And you just humiliated me in front of all of them. I looked at him, this man I had married, this person I had chosen to build a life with, and realized that I did not recognize him at all. Or perhaps I was seeing him clearly for the first time. I went after my mother, I said quietly. Your mother, he spat, his voice dripping with disgust. The janitor who just destroyed our wedding with her little performance. Did it ever occur to you to mention that you came from nothing? That your family is completely unsuitable? My parents are mortified, Sarah. Mortified. Good, I said, pulling my arm free from his grip. Maybe now they'll know who I really am. But even as I said the words, I knew it was too late. I had figured out who I was supposed to be just as I had lost the person who mattered most. I had finally found my way home, but the door had already closed behind me. The divorce papers were filed 3 weeks after the wedding that never truly ended. Michael's family made it clear that a marriage to someone of my background was unsuitable for their social standing, and honestly, I was relieved. The man I had married was not someone I could respect, let alone love, and staying with him would have been just another form of the dishonesty that had poisoned my life for years. I moved out of our Upper East Side apartment and into a modest one-bedroom in Queens, not far from the neighborhood where I had grown up. The decision horrified my former colleagues, who could not understand why anyone would voluntarily step down from luxury to live among common people. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The first thing I did in my new apartment was sit down at my kitchen table with a stack of legal documents and a pen that felt heavier than any signature I had ever written. The paperwork to legally change my name back to Santos was complicated, requiring affidavits and court appearances and fees that I paid gladly. But when the judge finally stamped the final document, I felt like I had been reborn. Sarah Santos. Not Sarah Santos Mitchell. Not Sarah Harrison, just Sarah Santos, the name my mother had given me. The name that connected me to generations of women who had worked with their hands and loved with their whole hearts and never apologized for either. The second thing I did was quit my job at the marketing firm. James Morrison was incredulous when I submitted my resignation, unable to comprehend why someone would walk away from a six-figure salary in a corner office to become what he called ordinary. But I had spent enough years chasing other people's definitions of success, and I was ready to discover what success meant to me. I used my savings to enroll in a nursing program at a community college in Queens. The decision felt like coming home, not just because it brought me back to my roots, but because it connected me to the part of myself that had always wanted to help people rather than sell things to them. My classmates were mostly women like my mother, hardworking, practical, unashamed of their backgrounds or their aspirations. They welcomed me without question, and for the first time since college, I had friends who knew exactly who I was and liked me anyway. But the most important change I made was reaching out to my mother. It took me 3 months to work up the courage to call her. 3 months of starting letters I never finished, of dialing numbers I hung up before they connected, of rehearsing conversations that never happened. I was terrified that she would not forgive me, that the damage I had done was too deep to repair, that her patience had finally run out. When I finally did call, she answered on the second ring, as if she had been waiting by the phone. "Hello?" Her voice was cautious, uncertain. "Mama," I said, the word feeling like a prayer. "It's me. It's Sarah." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then she started crying, not the quiet, dignified tears she had shed at my wedding, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who had been holding back an ocean of grief. "Mi amor," she finally managed. "My baby girl. I thought I would never hear from you again." "I'm sorry," I said, though the words felt completely inadequate. "I'm so sorry for everything. For the wedding, for the years of silence, for being ashamed of the most wonderful person I've ever known. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm hoping you might give me another chance." "Oh, Sarah," she said, her voice thick with tears and love. "You do not need to ask for chances. You are my daughter. You are my heart. There is nothing you could do that would make me stop loving you." We talked for 4 hours that night, and then every night for weeks afterward. I told her about the divorce, about my new apartment, about my decision to become a nurse. She told me about her job. She had been promoted to head custodian at a medical office building, which she was proud of, and about her small apartment, and about the prayer group at her church where she had been asking for guidance about how to reconnect with her daughter. "I never stopped praying for you," she said during one of our conversations. "Even when you were angry with me, even when you did not want to see me, I prayed every night that you would find your way back to yourself. Because the little girl I raised, the one who used to help me fold laundry and sing songs in Spanish and dream about becoming a doctor so she could help sick children, that girl was never gone. She was just lost for a while." The reunion happened on a Saturday afternoon in March, 6 months after my wedding and 3 months after my divorce was finalized. I drove to her apartment building with a trunk full of gifts, books I had read and wanted to share with her, photographs from my childhood that she had given me years ago, and a framed copy of my nursing school acceptance letter that I wanted her to see. But when she opened the door, all the gifts became irrelevant. We simply looked at each other for a moment, mother and daughter, 2 women who had found their way back to each other through years of pain and silence and stubborn love. And Then we were holding each other like we had on that street corner after my wedding. Like we were afraid the other might disappear. "Welcome home, mi amor," she whispered against my hair, and I knew that no matter what happened next, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 2 years later, I graduated from nursing school with honors and a job offer at the Children's Cancer Ward of Mount Sinai Hospital, the same hospital where I had been treated as a child, where my mother had spent countless nights sleeping in uncomfortable chairs and advocating for better care for her sick daughter. I celebrated my graduation not at an expensive restaurant in Manhattan, but in my mother's tiny kitchen, where she made my favorite empanadas, and we danced to the same Spanish music she had played when I was little. My diploma hung on her refrigerator next to my childhood drawings and report cards, in a place of honor that no corner office could ever match. 6 months after graduation, I met David Rodriguez, a pediatric oncologist who had heard about the new nurse who understood what it felt like to be a scared child in a hospital bed. He asked me out after watching me comfort a 7-year-old girl who was starting chemotherapy, and I knew he was special when his first question was about my family rather than my career prospects. Our first date was dinner at my mother's apartment, where David listened to her stories about my childhood and asked to see the photo albums I had been too sophisticated to appreciate just years before. He spoke to her in Spanish, better Spanish than I had bothered to maintain, and when she walked him to the door at the end of the evening, I heard her whisper, "Estás bueno, mi amor. This one is good." When David proposed to me 8 months later, he did it in my mother's living room, with her blessing and her ring, the simple gold band that had belonged to my grandmother, which my mother had kept safe through all the years when I was too proud to want anything that connected me to my past. "I want to marry both of you," he said, looking from me to my mother and back again, "because Sarah Santos without Maria Santos is not the complete woman I fell in love with." Our wedding was everything my first wedding was not. We held it in the community center of my mother's church, with folding chairs and potluck dishes and decorations that cost less than the flowers from my Plaza Hotel reception. David's family, teachers and social workers and small business owners mixed easily with my mother's friends from work and my classmates from nursing school. There were no society photographers, no designer gowns, no champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly salary. But my mother walked me down the aisle wearing a dress we had chosen together, her face radiant with the kind of joy that money cannot buy. When the priest asked who was giving me away, she said, "I am not giving her away. I am sharing her with someone who promises to love her as much as I do." David and I wrote our own vows, and when it was my turn to speak, I looked directly at my mother sitting in the front row. "I promise to love you with the kind of love my mother taught me," I said, my voice strong despite the tears streaming down my face. "The kind of love that never gives up, never stops believing, never stops fighting for the people who matter most. The kind of love that sees worth in people regardless of their job title or bank account or social status. The kind of love that makes sacrifices look like privileges and turns ordinary moments into miracles." After the ceremony, as we were cutting our simple 3-layer cake, my mother approached the microphone that we had borrowed from the church sound system. "I want to say something about my daughter," she began, her voice carrying easily through the small room filled with people we truly loved. 2 years ago, she stood up in front of 300 strangers and told them that I was an embarrassment to her, and you know what? She was right. The room went quiet, and I could see David's concerned expression as he wondered where this was going. "I was an embarrassment," my mother continued with a smile. "I was embarrassing because I made the mistake of loving my daughter so much that I forgot to teach her to love herself. I was embarrassing because I worked so hard to give her opportunities that I never showed her how to appreciate the things she already had. I was embarrassing because I was so busy being proud of her achievements that I never taught her to be proud of her heritage." She paused, looking directly at me with eyes full of love and mischief. "But my daughter is not embarrassing anymore," she said. "She is a nurse who saves lives. She is a woman who chose love over status, authenticity over approval, family over fortune. She is the person I always knew she could be, and I am proud to call her my daughter." The applause that followed was not the polite golf clap of high society, but the enthusiastic cheering of people who understood what it meant to find your way home. David and I danced our first dance to the same Spanish song my mother used to sing to me as a lullaby, and when the music ended, she joined us on the dance floor for a song that belonged to all 3 of us. That night, as David and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon a week at a small bed and breakfast in Vermont, that we had chosen because it reminded us both of the simple pleasures we had learned to value. My mother pulled me aside for a private moment. "Are you happy, my amour?" she asked, straightening my simple wedding dress one last time. "I'm happy," I said, and for the first time in my adult life, I meant it completely. "Good," she said, kissing my forehead like she had when I was a child. "Because happiness is not something you achieve or earn or deserve, it is something you choose, every single day. And today, you chose well." As David and I drove away from the community center, I looked back to see my mother standing in the doorway, waving goodbye with the same love and pride she had shown me every day of my life, even during the years when I was too blind to see it. I thought about the woman I had been 2 years earlier, standing in a designer wedding dress in a luxury hotel, surrounded by people who valued me for what I could do for them rather than who I truly was. I thought about the mother I had rejected and the life I had nearly thrown away in pursuit of a dream that was never really mine. But mostly, I thought about the gift my mother had given me, not just her love, which had never wavered, but her forgiveness, which had made it possible for me to forgive myself. She had shown me that it is never too late to come home, never too late to choose love over fear, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. My name is Sarah Santos, and I am the daughter of Maria Santos, a woman who cleans office buildings and has calloused hands and says prayers in Spanish, and loves more fiercely than anyone I have ever known. I am proud to carry her name, proud to share her strength, and proud to have learned that the most important inheritance a mother can give her daughter is not money or status or social connections. It is the unshakable knowledge that you are loved exactly as you are, and that love is the only success that truly matters.